my name is Kayla Helixo, and I'm in Japanese Literature 305, and I'm going to do a personal spoken essay analysis on Pella Book by Sei Shonagon. And the reason I chose this book is because I think it's very important to celebrate, encourage, and teach female voices throughout history, especially in ancient history where predominantly their voices weren't necessarily heard or shared. And I think especially in the sense of Pella Book was this well-educated think piece almost. And I think what really drew me to this book and why I chose it also was just the style of the writing. She kind of is the pioneer of this style of writing, and I think it's just much more ingestible. And I think that overall is why it's still taught today, is because it holds a lot of true values that humans feel. How this relates is that this idea of her being a sponge. Throughout the story, she goes back and forth from being a secondary character / observer to the main character, where she talks about things she enjoys or things that happen to her or her thoughts, or she goes and shares events that she has witnessed and observed and we're not necessarily participating in. And I think this is how a lot of people feel today, especially maybe throughout your 20s, especially, where you're just kind of observing and you're watching and you're thinking. And this ends up being kind of the central piece of her writing, is that she is this observer and she does make a lot of judgments, critical thinking pieces, and overall can hold some cruel opinions on things. But I think also the fact that this is about everyday life and how everyday life back then is vastly different, but where you're still engaging in the same behaviors and thoughts and opinions almost. So I want to play with this idea of audience. So how she got the paper to write the Pella Book is that the Empress gifted it to her. And she said, a pillow for me to like write my thoughts on. Basically, something along those lines. And I think this is super interesting because you would assume if the Empress gives you this paper for you to write on, it's this transactional deal that she's going to read it, it's going to get published, or that it's going to get out. So I think it's kind of hard for me to assume that she didn't think this was ever going to be shared. But the writing is so personal and so relatable and so random to some degree. I'm like, this might have just been her Pella Book. And when you say Pella Book, it just instantly makes me think of a diary. So I can't help but take that like image and idea out of my mind. And I just think it's a super interesting conversation to debate what perspective it really was. I don't know if I have a definitive answer on that. I think what also makes this book so important is the relatability of it. And on section 25, she writes about irritating things. And one of the first ones she uses is a crying baby when you're hearing things, when you're trying to be hearing something. And I think that's so interesting because to this day, crying babies still annoy a lot of people and cause them to be infuriated. But it kind of is the whole tone of this book, is that she'll say those things that are so relatable, like a crying baby, leaving the door open. And then she'll throw in like having your hair mixed in with the ink that you're grinding. Like, that is not relatable. I've never grinded ink in my life. I don't think I will. And I just will never face some of those problems or have some of the same experiences that she has. And I think that's kind of the tone of this book, is that you hear these things, you hear these stories, you read these things, you read these stories, and you're thinking about them, you're listening to what she's saying, and then she'll come out of left field and remind you that this was written thousands of years ago, and that this wasn't written in 2022. And I just think that was kind of the fun part of this book, is that you were like, how is this woman in ancient Japan touching on things that I think and feel on a daily basis? I also love the section 30 where she talks about how priests should be handsome. I think this is part of my favorite of her writing, is that she has these kind of guilty thoughts. I'm labeling them as guilty thoughts. They are just pieces that like maybe you wouldn't necessarily share out loud, but something you'd write in your diary, like how priests should be handsome, and that would make temple more enjoyable. And I think this also kind of ties into her overall personality, I would say, and maybe writing voice, which is this judgmental, critical, borderline cruel sometimes. perspective. And I think that without that edge to her, her writing wouldn't be as popular, it wouldn't be as relevant, and I think people would have a hard time relating to it because she talks about things like a cherry blossom cloak with violet trousers, and it was obviously of significance to her for some reason. I don't really know ancient Japanese art history that well, so I don't know that reason, but I think that her writing that down and putting it there holds so much value and gives us a look into this high court society. And to this day, you see in gossip magazines what people are wearing, and you just notice those type of things still. It's something that's so human and real to notice what someone's wearing. But she does it on such a she does this with such like a cool, calculated intelligent scale where it's almost like she takes your skin and she looks at you at face value and takes off your skin. She can see what's underneath. She can notice those minute behaviors. And I think that kind of makes her like a sociologist of her day. In conclusion, I think this is a very engaging story. And I think it's taught today because of that. It's just so engaging. I think it kind of gives us such an interesting perspective and a look into Japanese court society, and is just, I think it's kind of the human spirit articulated to some degree. And I also think it's important that we see these female voices that weren't always polite and weren't just writing poetry and were doing other things that make them very human and make them very relatable. And she is a very intelligent woman, and I have a lot of respect for her, and I overall really enjoyed the story. And that's some of my analysis. Thank you.